Hello, this is a Grand Avenue Reconstruction project update. My name is Dan Edgerton, and I'm a project planner with the City of Minneapolis Public Works Department. Here we've got a quick overview of what we hope to cover today. First, we're going to recap the project process and talk about what it's all about. We'll share some of the design concepts, some of the elements that have been presented so far for consideration on this project. We will provide some answers to some of the most frequent questions that we're hearing. We'll talk a little bit about next steps and how you can get involved, how you can provide your comments. So for project overview, big picture, what is this all about? It's a full reconstruction of Grand Avenue from 48th Street on the south up to Lake Street on the north. You can see the map on the screen that kind of gives the project extent. The main purpose of the project is to replace the pavement. The pavement condition is poor on this stretch of Grand Avenue. It's getting old and it's time to get out there and fix it. But while we're there, we're hoping we can make Grand Avenue safer for all users. And that means incorporating better sidewalks, better curb ramps to make the corridor easy to use for everybody, better managing traffic speeds. And in addition, while we're there, seeing what we can do to enhance greening, to get more plantings out there and to better manage stormwater infrastructure. So here you can see a project timeline. We're kind of spring 2020, right in the middle of the process, where we are kind of have gone through a couple of rounds of engagement. We've done some technical analysis, and now we're working on coming up with a recommended design layout. Footnote here is that our recommendation for our final layout has been postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis. And the project is going to stay flexible during this time and make sure that we're allowing folks to comment and make sure that people's voices are heard throughout this project. That said, the kind of tentative project schedule is to move forward with final design in the summer, fall of 2020, moving towards construction in spring of 2021. The good news is we've done a lot already, and we've heard a lot of your comments already. So here you can see a summary of some of the community engagement that's been done. We did an initial survey with over 300 responses. There was an online wiki map where you can kind of leave your comments on a live map that was well utilized. We've done some business meetings. We've met with some of the neighborhoods. We've done some stakeholder engagement with tables at community events. And we've had 2 rounds of public open houses that have happened so far. And so here you can see some of what the themes we're hearing are. So we during the initial round of engagement, asked people, what do you think about the corridor? How's it working? What do you like? Where are the opportunities for improvement? And this is some of the feedback that we got. What we're hearing is that multimodal safety and usability is really important. So that means not just the ability to drive along the corridor and park, but also the ability to ride the bus, the ability to walk safely and comfortably, and to ride a bike. We're also hearing about the desire for more green space, for more plantings, and for better stormwater infrastructure along the corridor. And then finally, one of the key themes that we're hearing is people don't want to expand the roadway. They want to stay within the existing right-of-way as much as we can. So a little bit more on right-of-way. The point of this slide is to illustrate that today, the existing width of the street from the outside of the sidewalk on the one side, all the way across the street to the outside of the sidewalk on the other side, is 54 feet. The actual right-of-way that the city has available for the street is 60 feet. So outside of the existing sidewalks that are there are a few feet in addition, additional right-of-way that's available for most of the corridor. So that's a key point in that where we can, we're going to try to stay within the existing right-of-way, but in some places we may need to use the full right-of-way in order to accommodate everything that we need to get into the corridor. So here we just want to make the point on how decisions are made. There are many inputs that are considered throughout the process, and this chart kind of shows some of the big ones. We want to hear community feedback. That includes residents along the corridors, that includes adjacent businesses, nearby businesses, and other users in the community. We're going to consider all the technical constraints, so the right-of-way, what needs to happen with utilities, what we can do from a technical perspective. And then there are kind of overall arching policy objectives that we're considering as well. things like Access Minneapolis, which is the city's transportation plan, kind of guides the implementation of transportation infrastructure and programs throughout the city. Vision Zero, which is an effort to reduce traffic incidents, crashes throughout the city and get to a point where there are zero traffic deaths. And then complete street policy, which is something that encourages the consideration of all users on corridors that are up for reconstruction. Okay, so what are some of the design elements that we're considering for Grand Avenue? This slide is going to be kind of hard to read on your screen, but that's okay because we're going to touch each one of these squares in the table individually in the next several slides. But the point that I wanted to make here is on the top of this table, you can see some of the design elements that we're going to talk about next. And then on the side of the table, the row headings are sort of those project goals, key engagement themes that we're hearing from stakeholders. And so we really tried to make sure that the design elements that we're proposing solve some of the issues along the corridor. And so with that, we're going to take some of these one by one and just talk about them. So the first point to make in this project is what's there today does not even meet kind of our minimum standard for a pedestrian zone. In many cases, there's a 6-foot sidewalk or even less with no boulevard today, so that you've got a sidewalk and there's a curb, and then the parking lane and the moving cars are right next to that curb. And it's not even kind of the minimum standard for a pedestrian zone. So the first thing that we're considering is to bring the corridor up to sort of that minimum standard for the pedestrian zone, which includes a 6-foot wide sidewalk as well as a 6-foot wide boulevard along the entire corridor. So the benefit here is that it's going to make it more usable, safer for all users, for people walking and rolling along the corridor. It also provides the opportunity with the boulevards for increased green space, and it gives you that buffer between the sidewalk and moving vehicles to enhance safety. The trade-off here is in some cases that means we need to expand the roadway, which could require more right-of-way. So I had that slide that showed the existing 54 feet of roadway and the available 60 feet of right-of-way. And so in some cases, in order to fit everything in, we might look at expanding the existing right-of-way. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit here. This is just a picture of kind of a computer rendering of what that might look like along Grand Avenue with that 6-foot standard sidewalk and some boulevards in place. So, a little bit more room for green space. Okay, intersections. So just like with the sidewalks and boulevards, we know that intersections are critical for movement, for safety of all users. And today we're not even meeting the minimum kind of typical standard for pedestrian accommodations at most of the intersections along this corridor. So the kind of minimum standard or the default treatment for intersections throughout the city in these types of areas is to use bump outs, or also called curb extensions, which basically physically expand or bump out the sidewalk into the crossing, into the area that would be a parking lane, to shorten the crossing distance. This encourages safer vehicle travel speeds, and it also creates a shorter crossing distance for people walking across the street. It can increase visibility so that drivers can more clearly see people walking across the street, and in some cases it can improve bus travel times. The trade-off is it may reduce on-street parking capacity in some areas, so this bump out kind of bumps into the parking lane, and it could restrict movements of turns for larger vehicles. So if there are delivery trucks, we need to design the bump outs in such a way that we're not limiting the ability of trucks to get around the corners. Okay, so wider sidewalks, bump outs at intersections, these are kind of the minimum design standards that we feel we need to accommodate with this project. The next several slides, we're going to cover some of the design elements or strategies that could be considered throughout this corridor. So these aren't necessarily kind of minimum standards that will be implemented everywhere, but instead there's some tools that we're considering to achieve some of the project goals throughout the corridor. So the first one we want to talk about is a mid-block alignment shift. This is also called a chicane. But basically this is a tool that we can use in between controlled intersections, so stop signs or traffic signals, to encourage safer travel speeds. It also provides additional space within the corridor for plantings, for greenery, things like that. And it allows us to alternate parking from side to side to provide a little bit more space. The trade-off is doing this alignment shift takes space in the road, and it could reduce on-street parking in some areas. Again, this is just a computer rendering of what that looks like. It's a wiggle, if you will, in the road that sort of helps to encourage a safer travel speed for vehicles. And then you've got some additional space out there for planting, for trees, things like that. Okay, so this is another big strategy that we're considering for this corridor. Think back to that slide where I showed the existing 54 foot of right-of-way versus the 60 feet of right-of-way that we have available. And I made the point that in order to fit in the minimum design requirements, so a standard sidewalk and a minimum boulevard width, we've got to create room. And that could mean expanding to the full right-of-way to the 60 feet in some areas, or we've got to find the room somewhere else. So one of the tools we're considering for those areas where we can't expand the right-of-way is to limit parking to one side of the street only, and then alternate that parking so that it happens on both sides of the street. That provides the extra room to get in everything that we need. It also improves winter operations such that a plow can come by in the winter when it snows and clear that curb line pretty quick. Trade-off here again is that it could reduce on-street parking. Transit revisions, we want to touch on this very quickly. There are currently bus routes along this corridor. Bus routes stop generally every block. We're looking at certain locations where there is low ridership, kind of the more quiet bus stops that are out there for consolidation, or in other words, to eliminate some of the bus stops along the corridor. This provides space. Taking away some of those bus stops gives us additional space, more capacity for things like on-street parking, bump outs at intersections, things like that. In addition, it leads to faster transit operation because the bus is making less stops. The trade-off is those who use those stops today would then have to walk a block farther to get to a transit stop that's going to stay. Okay, another tool in the toolbox that we can consider at intersections is median crossings. So a median crossing, what we're talking about is a raised concrete median in the middle of the intersection. And what this does is it improves safety for cyclists and for pedestrians walking across the street by limiting the ability of vehicles to make a turn. So in this case, a vehicle is physically prevented by the median from making a left turn. And that eliminates then the conflict point or the potential for a crash with a pedestrian or cyclist. The trade-off there, of course, is that it would prevent vehicles from making turns where this is implemented. Okay, and wanted to just mention bikeways. This is just an important footnote of, think about why we would consider something like a median treatment in an intersection. One of the reasons is, I know that the map is going to be kind of hard for you to read, but Grand Avenue is up on the kind of the north side of that map. One of the reasons that we want to think about this is along Grand Avenue, although we're not proposing a bikeway with this project to be included along Grand Avenue, there are several bikeways that will cross Grand Avenue. And so we need to make sure that we're considering how to get bicyclists and pedestrians safely across Grand Avenue at these bikeways. And then finally, one of the things that we're considering, one of the tools in the toolbox is ways to increase water quality infrastructure. So things like rain gardens or infiltration, you can kind of see in the picture here, to help remove pollutants from stormwater and improve the quality of stormwater that then makes it into our lakes and streams. So this is something that we're considering where it makes sense to do so along the corridor. The trade-offs here are that it does require some additional periodic maintenance, and it requires space like a bump out in a boulevard, which could further limit on-street parking capacity. Okay, so here we're going to talk a little bit about, well, what does this all look like on Grand Avenue? What's the proposed design? This is sort of an illustration of what the layout looks like and what you can expect to see. It's a top-down view of Grand Avenue showing kind of what the design looks like in terms of sidewalks, boulevards, bump outs, these chicanes we were talking about, or alignment shifts, as well as kind of the vehicle travel lanes and parking. This is just sort of a representative example of what this looks like. in order to view the whole concept layout for Grand Avenue and sort of zoom in on the points that you're most interested in, please visit the project website. And the link for that is here on the screen. I'll pause in case you need to write it down or copy it. So go online, check out the website. There are other updates there. Download the layout, you can look at it, and then take a look. We want you to review the layout, and then we want you to get back to us and give us your concepts or give us your comments. Let us know what you think about the layout. Okay, so now I want to touch on some frequently asked questions. I know that there's a lot of conversation about this project, and there are a lot of questions out there. Here are some responses to some of the most kind of frequent, the questions that we hear most often. So one of the big questions that we get is what's the proposal for on-street parking along Grand Avenue? Given that because of the right-of-way constraints, there are going to be some areas where we're proposing limiting to parking to just one side of the street. So here on the slide, you can see that with a draft design concept, parking is proposed to be maintained on both sides of the street, on a half block south of 31st Street, 1/2 block north of 33rd Street, 1/2 block north of 34th Street, and 1/2 block north and south of 36th Street, and then full blocks between 37th Street and 39th Street. Again, looking back a few slides, we have the link to the project layout. If you go look at the project layout, you can see this illustrated on a map to better understand what's going on with parking. Another question that we're getting is why can't the city widen the street to keep parking on both sides and kind of get that minimum sidewalk location? The short answer is in some areas we can do that without having real big impacts to adjacent properties. And in those areas, we are planning to do so. In other locations, we can't really do that without having substantial impacts to the property. Things like slopes or substantial landscaping are there, and widening the sidewalk would result in significant impacts to that, and things like retaining walls and needing to rebuild steps, etc. The picture here is just of an example, a typical example that you can see all along the corridor. Some really nice landscaping on a slope that if we were to move the sidewalk closer to the house, we would have an impact on. So what other options are out there? What other tools do we have to maintain parking, to better manage parking? There is one big tool in the toolbox that we're going to consider. Much of the corridor today has unrestricted parking. It's not metered. There are no time restrictions, so somebody can park all day and kind of stay there. So one of the tools in the toolbox is to consider time restricted parking zones. So what this is picture a sign on the side of the road. It might be 2 hours that would say, parking limited to 2 hours. What this does is increases turnover so that somebody can't park all day, and thereby gives us more capacity for nearby adjacent land uses like the businesses at the business nodes. And we're hoping to look at this for implementation in such a way that we can increase capacity where it's needed, but also be mindful of the needs of nearby residents. I just wanted to make the point that there was a parking study done. A parking study basically represents going out into the field and doing observations of the number of cars parked along the corridor. It's not a perfect kind of representation of parking along the corridor because parking is dynamic and it changes all the time. But it's, it provides kind of a snapshot, and it can tell us, a little bit about what parking looks like on a corridor. So we did do parking studies at 8 separate times: weekdays, evenings, afternoons, mornings, also on the weekends. And you can kind of see some of the results here. The big picture is that we found the most constrained spots along the corridor where parking is most highly used are the places that you would assume. It's the business nodes, it's the places where there are multifamily residential or apartment buildings along the corridor. And then the places that are sort of the least used are the places in between. So for about half of the corridor, at least during the times where we observed, parking on Grand Avenue was less than 50% full. So you can see on the map on the slide that it's generally the lighter green areas are the places where parking wasn't full. The darker orange and red areas are the places where parking was full. Okay, so now we're going to move past parking and just quickly touch on a few additional frequently asked questions. One is assessments. So a question we always get is, will there be assessments for this project? The answer is yes. Within the city of Minneapolis, All street projects generally include a property assessment. The property assessment is based on what's called the influence area. It's a calculated fee based on the amount of frontage you have on Grand Avenue as well as the depth of your property. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you can see the full assessment policy at the city's assessment website. And again, the link is on the screen. The assessment rate is set annually and it's a fixed rate. It's the same for everybody. And you can find more information about that on the city's assessment website. Okay, we already touched on this a little bit, but a question that we always get is, are bike facilities being proposed along the corridor? The answer is no. However, there is one exception. And the exception is along Grand Avenue from 31st Street to Lake Street. So that very northernmost one block of the project, we are proposing to include bike facilities. And the reason for that is because there's a planned future bikeway along Pleasant Avenue, which is one block to the east of Grand Avenue. And on Pleasant Avenue, there is no traffic signal at Lake Street, which is a busy road. So in order to allow the future planned bikeway to cross Lake Street at a traffic signal, we're proposing to kind of jog it over at Grand Avenue and cross at Grand. That also provides the added benefit of providing a direct connection to Whittier Elementary School as well as Washburn High School. Okay, so that's it. I've got a few more slides here. And the point we want to make is we do want to hear what you have to say. We want you to stay involved. Please do that. Please continue to check the website for updates. And we want to hear from you. Which of the design elements do you like? What are you excited about? What don't you like? And where are the trade-offs that you'd be willing to make in order to get what you're interested in seeing on this corridor? So how can you get us your comments? Unfortunately, in-person meetings are canceled right now for health reasons relating to COVID-19. Stay tuned, keep checking the website, and when we can meet again, we will. For now, the best way to communicate with us, the best way to provide your comments is to either call or directly email myself or Bev, who is the project engineer. And next slide, I'll give you contact information. We're also trying to make city staff available to attend community meetings where they're happening to answer questions. So right now we've got a neighborhood meeting scheduled on April 20th, 2020 with the Tangletown Neighborhood Association. They're hosting the meeting. It's a digital meeting and we're planning to participate and answer questions about this project. So that's one way that you can get involved and hear more about this project. And finally, here you can see our contact information. Again, I'm Dan Edgerton. I'm the project planner for the city of Minneapolis. And then Bev Wormka is my counterpart, and Bev is the engineer for this project. You can see there our email address and our telephone numbers, and we welcome your comments at any time. Please do get involved. With that, I'll thank you for your time today, and we will conclude this meeting.